Good evening and welcome to the March 18, 2015 Special Select Board meeting. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a sole agenda meeting tonight, or a sole purpose agenda for tonight's meeting, and we're going to have the school committee and Superintendent Tom Mazza is going to address the board and the community with the SOI for the middle school that's coming up. Before we start with the presentation, is there any visitor comments? Any school board comments, school committee comments?
I think you'll hear enough from us a little bit later.
Okay. Any select board comments? It's getting breezing right along. Okay, Marie, I guess we'll turn it over to you guys for your presentation.
Great, thank you. We'd like to thank you for having this meeting to host us. We'd like to go through the SOIs, and I'm going to start by talking about what some of the dilemmas are with the middle school. First of all, when the MSBA looks at funding a project, they look at a priority list, and they have 8 priorities that they look at. And you have to fit your SOI into the criteria they give you. Our criteria is number 4, prevention of severe overcrowding expected to result from increased enrollments. 5, replacement, renovation, or modernization of a school facility system such as roofs, windows, boilers, heating and ventilation systems to increase energy conservation and decrease energy-related costs in a school facility. And 7, replacement of or addition to an obsolete building in order to provide a full range of programs consistent with state and approved local requirements. I'm following the MSBA's outline, so we're going to talk first about to prevent severe overcrowding expected to result from an increase in enrollments. When you looked at both of the SOIs, you'll notice that Williams and Glenbrook's are very similar. We copied them, frequently rewording and cutting and pasting because the MSBA wants the same information presented on both when you're talking about consolidation of one building. In the middle schools, we're hoping to build more special education programs. Over the past 4 to 5 years, we've been doing that at the elementary level quite successfully. We've built 4 distinct programs for our students, and that has saved the school district over $750,000 to date. On top of saving money by bringing kids home, we're able to ensure a much better education because we hire the teachers, we create the curriculum, and we can set high expectations for our own students. As these students rise through the elementary school, they're going to be continuing their education at the middle school. So we're looking to build an autism program as well as a social emotionally challenged program for kids. We already have a learning disabilities program at Williams, and we have a cognitively delayed program at Glenbrook. So Glenbrook Middle School has approximately 300 students. All of the classrooms are currently used. Williams Middle School has 375 students. It has 2 modular classrooms, and again, all the spaces are used. It's the home for the LLD program. If we were to build these new special education programs, we would need spaces for not only the classrooms but support staff. When you build programs such as an autism or a social emotional program, you need spaces for adjustment counselors, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language, social workers, teaching assistants, small learning spaces, timeout rooms, and more. In addition, you need at least 1 full classroom, and that's usually 1 classroom for every 8 students. Priority 4 says to please describe the conditions within the community and school district that are expected to result in the increased enrollment, and that is our special ed programs. If you were to visit both schools today, you'll find that every classroom is used, it's filled to capacity, but it's the addition of programs that's going to substantially change our enrollment factors. It also says, please provide a detailed explanation of the impact of the problem described in this priority and how that presents a challenge for our educational program. First of all, we believe in neighborhood schools. We like to keep kids in district as much as possible. They're able to make friends in the neighborhood. It reduces our busing costs. It also means children spend less time on buses, and we can improve the quality of education. Priority 5 was the replacement, renovation, and modernization of the school facility systems, such as roofs, windows, boilers, heating, and ventilation systems, to increase energy conservation and decrease energy-related costs in the school facility. To start with, the MSBA likes to hear about consolidation. I personally favor forming 2 middle schools into one because I think it's educationally sound for the sound for the town. We're looking at declining enrollment, and over the next 10 years, we'll probably see a drop down to about 600 students. That's an ideal size for a middle school. It means that you can expand course offerings, you can consolidate administration, custodian, kitchen services, and more, reducing the cost and operating the footprint. It also gives you greater flexibility in a schedule because you're able to spread out what teachers' responsibilities and duties are. Alex asked me earlier, isn't the trend to go to smaller schools? And when you're hearing about the trend to go to smaller schools, that's really talking about larger high schools where you have a population of 2,000 students or so, and they look to break those down into schools around 600 to 1,000. So when we're talking about a school of about 600 for middle school students, that's an ideal size. The first question for priority 5 is to provide a detailed description of the issues surrounding the school facility systems, roof, windows, boilers, HVAC system, electrical service, and distribution system that you are indicating require repair or replacement. Please describe all deficiencies to all systems in sufficient detail to explain the problem. And I'm going to ask Tom Mazza to walk you through this right now.
Good evening. Quick overview of the buildings. Glenbrook was constructed in 1967, consists of approximately 95,000 square feet. The roof was put in 1998, so it's approximately 16 years old. There was a multi-phase project to replace the windows. If you recall, the rooms had exterior sliding glass doors to get out to the building, and they were replaced during this window project. And it was, again, a 3-year project, replacing just about all of the original windows to the building, approximately 400-plus windows throughout the facility. There are 2 boilers.
Tom?
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you just say what you said again about the window? I didn't quite catch all of it.
So we had a capital project that was, I believe, a 3-phase project over 3 years in FY07 through 09 to replace the original windows that were in the building, and some of those were sliding glass
Which
doors.
school?
Glenbrook. The building operates off of 2 boilers. The first boiler was installed in 2002. After 9 years of service at the high school, it was repurposed and moved to Glenbrook. The second boiler was installed in 2006. There was a capital project request submitted this year to replace a boiler. The recommendation was to redo some of the plumbing to help improve the efficiency and use of them so that they can run in tandem. Currently, they cannot work at the same time. If there's a demand for an increase in the heating in the building, there's no mechanism to allow both boilers to kick in to provide that extra heat. So the recommendation from that capital request is to, I believe, request $30,000 to redo some of the piping and some valves so that they can operate in tandem. The HVAC system, for the most part, is original to the building. Mechanical and electrical have had some minor upgrades, but for the most part is original to the construction in 1967. The building is not air conditioned except for a few areas, the main office. I believe there are 4 window units in specific areas in the building. But for the most part, there is no air conditioning throughout Glenbrook. Some of the projects that have been accomplished over the years is removal of the carpet and replace it with VCT, replacement of the concrete stairs that were deteriorating and became a safety issue. There was some structural reinforcement, a lighting fixture retrofit project that was just completed in the last few months, a new telephone system, and as I mentioned earlier, the windows. Williams was constructed in 1959. As the superintendent indicated, there are 2 modular classrooms that were installed in 1988. The overall square footage, including the modular space is about 75,800 square feet. The roof on that facility was installed in 1994, so it's at approximately 20 years, again, which is about the useful life of the roof. Doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be replaced immediately, but it most certainly has reached the estimated useful life of it. The windows, for the most part, are original. There was a project to replace a small percentage, about 5 or 10% of the windows about 6 years ago. There are about 740 windows remaining that are original single pane metal frame windows, so very inefficient. Again, similar to Glenbrook, Williams has 2 boilers. In 2000, this past summer, 2014, there was a capital project to replace one of the 2 boilers, a $100,000 investment at Williams, and it has done a good job in terms of keeping the heat consistent throughout the building. There is a second boiler that will kick in when need be if there is a demand for additional heat due to cold weather. The HVAC system, again, is pretty original. The electrical, there has not been major upgrades. There have been some small improvements, additional boxes added for LEAF-funded lighting in the auditorium for the stage. That was accomplished, again, in the last year or so. There is window units throughout the building. I believe there's approximately 30 or so air conditioning units that are used as the weather warms up to help create some comfort for the learning environment. And there are some rooftop units to help that air condition in the main office. Some of the projects that have been accomplished there would be some abatement of the asbestos floor tiles. That was done, again, over multiple phases. The lighting fixture retrofit, similar to Glenbrook, was also completed just in the last few months. The new boiler, as I indicated, a new telephone system, and exhaust fans. About half of the exhaust fans for the building have been replaced, and there was a capital request also submitted for next year for the replacement of the remaining half. I think there was a cost of approximately $35,000 or so. So that's an overview of the infrastructure and the challenges that the buildings have in terms of mechanical and electrical and building systems.
The next part of the SOI is to describe how these problems impact the education of the children. I think the very first thing we look at is the open classroom design at Glenbrook. For those of you who have not been to Glenbrook Middle School, it was designed back in the 60s with the concept of open classroom. It meant that there were not doors and walls put up in most areas of the building. Over the past 20-plus years, we've added walls to classrooms where we can, but they still don't have doors that shut, and the entire 6th grade wing is still an open classroom concept. We looked at even moving doors and windows from and walls from the old high school, but it was just too costly to do that, so that still remains a problem. That's a security issue should an intruder come in the building. It also creates great amounts of noise and distractions for students while they're learning. I think that would be the major flaw in the educational plan over at Glenbrook. If you visit Williams, you'll notice the classrooms are relatively small. In this day and age where we have computers in classrooms, computer carts containing technology to use, as well as the science labs, they're really undersized for this day and age in technology. The inefficient heating and HVAC system means poor air quality. The rooms can be too hot, too cold. Glenbrook has no air conditioning, while Williams has units in the windows that do not provide sufficient HVAC conditions for learning. The windows and doors are also inadequate throughout the Glenbrook facility. The major concerns with the heating infrastructure and the electrical system are things that concern us. While there have been significant renovations to these systems over the past, since the 1960s, it still has not brought the building to a place where we find it's educationally acceptable for our children. We still have concerns about asbestos, accessibility for kids. At Glenbrook in particular, we have a device that you place on the side of the stairway, you put a wheelchair on that, and the child goes up that way. It's rickety, it's not stable, and it's not appropriate to have that type of accessibility in this day and age. The environment for teaching and learning, if we had upgrades where we had enclosed facilities where students could hear what was going on in the classroom, would certainly improve the quality of education. Priority 7 is the replacement of or addition to obsolete buildings in order to provide a full range of programs consistent with state and approved local requirements. The detailed description of how the programs not currently available due to facility constraints, the state or local requirements for such programs, and the facility limitations precluding the programs from being offered. We talked about the open classrooms. I think many of you are aware that STEM education is paramount right now. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. We're limited in our facilities, and if we were to combine both middle schools into one, we'd be able to offer more opportunities for our students because we'd have more flexibility with staff assignments. The science labs are undersized at Williams Middle School. To increase the size of labs mean that the students could do more labs and have technology operating at the same time. We have an expanding population in ELL, that's English language learners, and with that increased population, by law, we have to provide a classroom for that when we have enough students to fill a program, and we're seeing an increase every single year in English language learners. Again, it's not handicapped accessible, and we want to build those special education programs in autism and the social emotional program. Priority 7 asks what steps the district has taken or is planning to take in the immediate future to mitigate the problems described above. We've attempted to close in the open classrooms by adding walls and doors whenever it's been possible. It's been extremely costly, and the town stopped doing that in hopes that we would be building new facilities soon. We take a look at the boilers in the HVAC system. We've replaced one boiler at Williams. We're working on replacing a boiler at Glenbrook. And again, we're partially doing things as we're waiting to decide whether to move forward with no buildings. The entire 6th grade wing at Glenbrook remains exposed to anyone entering the hallway. The noise while learning is quite high due to the open classroom setup. Our solution and recommendation to the MSBA and to you is to build a new middle school that is capable of housing all the middle school students together, that includes all learning styles. Priority 7, question 3, please provide a detailed explanation of the impacts of the problem described in the priority in your district's educational program. Please note that these questions are redundant. I'm reading them exactly as required by the MSBA. Please include specific example of how the problem prevents the district from delivering the educational programs required to deliver, and how students and/or teachers are directly affected by the problems identified. Again, we would like to have students from special education in their neighborhood schools. We'd like to have programs that provide a quality education for all of our students, including ELL and special education students. We'd like to see time on buses limited. We'd like to see a more cost-effective and energy-efficient school created by housing all middle school students on one site, and we'd improve the quality of education for all of our students if they could attend Long Meadow Public Schools. So tonight we come and ask your support for the SOI. Again, Glenbrook and Williams are very similar in their presentation. The MSBA requires 2 SOIs. They did not allow us to submit only one. So you will see redundancy in the 2 reports. We do know that we're presenting to you tonight and that you'll be taking a vote on April 6th, so that people who are watching can follow this, and if they have input, they certainly can contact a select board member or a school committee member. We have our school committee members here tonight as well. So at this point, I'll open it up to questions for the select board.
Question?
Go ahead.
I just have a couple. One, Tom, I think I appreciate your summary. The one thing that grabbed me out of the SOIs when I read them that you didn't highlight, you probably should have, is the electrical substandardness of the electrical systems in the schools. I thought that was marked in its how little electrical power there was in the 2 schools, and I just think it's important to include that. The one comment I do want to make is I think we need to assure, because there were a couple of comments tonight about asbestos. I think we need to assure parents that the asbestos in these buildings is not free asbestos, it's not friable asbestos, it's not exposing children to asbestos, it's in most cases underneath a layer, inside layers, inside walls, and I just need to say that
Inside
so people,
Exactly.
so that we don't get.
And that's the same disclosure that I asked that we make at our meeting when we
Fine.
approved
I
it. So,
just need to say
yeah.
that. The other, I guess the question, I have a couple of questions, but I've heard twice or 3 times, there's no air conditioning. Do we have I don't know what the right word is, a desire, an expectation that a new middle school would be I don't know if it value engineered out, or if it was selected out, but it's not in the high school, and I was wondering if we would expect to be doing that in the middle school.
It's a good question. Many schools do not put in air conditioning, but there's a new type of system that actually pulls the humidity out, and that's what the
Well,
high
that's what
school
we've got in
has.
high school, right?
The high school offices or any location that is used year-round is air-conditioned, but the classroom, Building C is not, but it's this new design that actually extracts the humidity, and it's supposed to make it feel much cooler.
A couple other questions, and you answered one of them, and that is the learning pedagogy of one versus two schools and how that works. And apparently, I'm not an educator, so I'm going to defer to your comments on that. I think one of the things that, though, I think we do need to think about is there an overall plan? And I guess that's the question that I've gotten asked most by a couple of people that have asked me is, what is the overall plan? Or, and the analogy that I've heard is between the high school plan, where there was a lot of discussion, and for those of you who weren't here, including at the time when we thought Twin Hills Country Club was a little shaky, putting one high school at Twin Hills Country Club, and there's talk about putting it over on Russell. But there's a lot of discussion that most of that was sorted out prior to the submission of the SOI. And so the question is there any more of a developed plan, any more of a community consensus than, we've got two middle schools that are aged as we go forward with the SOI?
This SOI started back before my time, 2009, 2010.
I think the history of it is that they were submitting all three at the exact same time.
And you're asking a good question, Mark. When the SOI is approved by the MSBA, at that point, there is a feasibility study done. At that time, they'll tell us to develop an educational statement. They will decide whether or not they would fund one school or two schools. They would also put together, we would put together a team that they would help fund that's to study sites, buildings, to see what would need to be done. But it's at that time you'd have an awful lot of detailed work done. I will speak to the educational philosophy because during Alex's walkthrough earlier, this came up as well. When you have one middle school, middle schools and high schools, teachers are certified according to the content area. They're specialists in a specific area. Elementary teachers are more generalists so that they study all different subject areas. In a smaller middle school, you often have teachers that are forced to teach outside of their expertise, and that's not an ideal situation. You can have a teacher that teaches 3 sections of English, 1 section of math, because you just need the math section filled. When you have a larger middle school, and I'm talking about 600 to 700 kids, most of the time the teachers are able to teach within their subject area, so students are facing instruction where you have an expert teaching them. Also, one thing that happens when you have smaller middle schools, as we do right now, class sizes are not balanced. We've had years that Williams has had 28, 29 kids in a class while Glenbrook's had 21. And that's because your populations aren't large enough to address that problem. So philosophically, it's not only financially better, it's educationally much more sound, I think, for the children to be in one middle school, and I'd highly recommend that to the town for educational purposes, and not just because it would be ideal to have one cost-effective middle school.
As the parent of a child who literally rolled out of bed 8:05 to get to his 8:15 middle school classes, because that's how close we live, what's the impact of busing when you go to a single school, both just in theory, but also as you work it into costs or operations or any of that kind of stuff? I've got to believe that a single school, even though it's somewhat central, it could be somewhat centrally located in the town, although there's no locations,
Right.
would result in a larger amount of busing at the middle school level.
We are mandated to give busing to students who live more than 2 miles away in grades 7 through 12. No busing, I'm sorry. Mandated for 2 miles more, K through 6. Grades 7 through 12, we don't have to provide it, but we do. The Transportation Committee has been working on busing, and they've made a route that goes primarily around the main streets in Longmeadow so that we're picking students up at this time. We're moving forward with a plan that looks like we'll be transporting middle and high school students on the same bus. So I'm not sure what the impact would be, but that's part of, if you're selected by the MSBA, it would also include a transportation study to see what the impact would be if you had 2 middle schools versus 1. But you are not required to provide transportation for students in grades 7 through 12.
With that being said, since the beginning of the middle school working group, and maybe you guys can speak more to this, they did take, and when I was on it and now that you've been on, we've taken a holistic sort of approach of trying to pinpoint exactly what that impact would be of having to bus students who currently go to Williams to a Glenbrook site and vice versa. And I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit, or if you're able to.
No, I mean, like, without having the clear data of which site we choose, we hadn't gone into too many numbers, just
Right.
sort of like,
No.
sort of having it out there and knowing that it's an option.
The Transportation Committee did endorse the fact that we should provide transportation. We have families with 2 working parents, so we've tried to make a route that goes all the way around Town Mark. So it would seem to me this route would still be effective whether you had 1 or 2 middle schools, with not a major impact. I think that the cost savings of having 1 middle school would outweigh any transportation costs that would be incurred.
Okay. Thank you. The only other question I was going to ask you is that and I don't know who's in charge of this kind of thinking, but in terms of location, the school committee has, I don't know if what the right word is. I think it has first right of refusal or control of some land that the town owns, which is generally goes by the name of the water tower land. And I guess my question is, with all that, Glenbrook area, water tower area, Williams area, is any of that potentially going to become available to others? And at what point in the process might that become available if it's not being used? I mean, at some point we've got to, make a decision and cut the other sites loose if we're not going to do that. And it's kind of hampered some of the discussions at the select board level for development.
I can give you my recommendation. School committee has not voted on this. My advice to school committee is to keep 1 extra lot of land in case there's ever a surge of population in the future. But if we went to 1 middle school site, I would recommend that they give 1 site of land back to the town. It has been discussed in informal ways, but never a formal discussion. But I feel that holding 1 for the future would just be wise. The reason school committees were given jurisdiction over land many years ago, because there are many cities and towns that when the population dropped, they sold everything off. And then when the population soared again, they didn't have any land to build a school. So at that time, many cities and towns, rightfully so and intelligently, put that in the jurisdiction of school committee to be caretakers of the land. You don't need 2 sites, you only need 1 site, though.
Okay, thank you.
Alex?
Well, as Marie, you were alluding to, you and I and Janet toured the 2 schools, which was useful for me because, I was not familiar with all the areas of the school. I guess, my one observation, which I think I also told you, is that this seems way more complicated than the high school. Because when you start talking about combining, you're talking about a whole lot of other issues, like we were just talking about, giving land back to the schools, that you get into field space and gym space and potential development of land. And so, I mean, there's a lot of more dimensions to this plan than I think in the high school. And sort of to that point, I don't know, one thing that seems valuable to me, because you have this aspect of combining, is getting the input of the community. I mean, I just don't know, and maybe you guys are closer to it. I mean, I'm addressing the school committee, is this something that the Glenbrook community wants? Is this something that the Williams School wants? Do they want to be, do they want 1 school? I mean, this seems to me like it would be great to have a public forum and to sort of sort that out sort of at the front end of the process, which I think maybe kind of goes to your point, Mark, that sort of some of those basic questions were sort of ironed out, early on in the high school process.
So just my own sort of anecdotally, I think we've all heard throughout the community that 1 middle school would be preferable. Now, which site, that's where you get into kind of preferences over Glenbrook and Williams. But, I mean, I think since we began having a middle school working group in 2012, we've been hearing those types of comments from people. But again, it's all very anecdotal. The process that we go through, and because we're approaching this, in a very different way than the high school was approached. I mean, the high school was a conversation probably began in 1999, 2000. There was a kind of a very clear idea about what they wanted, and we obviously know what we want, and I think that the superintendent's done a good job of articulating that. But the way the process works is that once we're engaged by the state and we're asked to conduct feasibility, that decision about whether we stick with one or stick with two or we combine, that gets fleshed out as an outcome of the feasibility study. And they'll present us with options the same way that the last feasibility study did, whether it was renovate or new construction. All of those things are outcomes. And then you begin doing those visioning sessions that really contributed and led to the construction of this building and the way you see it now. So, there was obviously a lot of work that was done prior to the high school even making its way through the process, but a lot of what you see here today, including site selection, really did happen after they were engaged by the MSBA.
Our plan was to do that. If this is passed by the select board, the next thing would be public forums, open up the schools to the public to bring them in for tours, and to set up community support if we are approved for that. But there's an awful lot of work that will go into that. But Michael's right, the visioning is part of the process, and the MSBA will certainly indicate a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether or not we can even consider one school.
Right.
So, but at that time, we'll be required to do a certain amount of work as well. But the middle school task force, our goal was to get this passed and then to start to do all kinds of public communication around it.
If I could just add something to it. I believe I'm the only member, I am the only member. The current school committee was here in 2008. And in 2008, we were following through on discussions of 2007 on building a new high school. Okay? And then that came to a climax in 2010. When that went through, there were some of us who said, well, we ought to be looking at the middle schools as well, especially since at that time there seemed to be some state money available. State money is now much more problematic. That's my current understanding. But there never was an agenda of the school committee, and I'm the only surviving member of the ones who were here in 2008, to say, okay, we're going to build new schools. It was on the basis of need and people just raising the question about which building was in the worst shape. That was the high school. And then looking at other buildings, even with some changes. Now, we took care of the elementary schools back in the 90s, and that's when we added space to Wolf Swamp Road School and also to Center School, did a major renovation.
In Blueberry Hill.
Pardon me?
Blueberry Hills.
And Blueberry Hill. So we did do that, but we did not touch the middle schools. And so it just kept popping up. And I think 2010 was when it was the last time we submitted SOIs, if memory serves.
2011.
2011.
In 2011, okay. But that was it. And it didn't get picked up by the state, and they're looking at other districts that have greater priorities. And given the winter we've just gone through, there's going to be some school buildings that have roof collapses and other problems like that. But I just want to say this has been there because we've reflected on our responsibility of what should we be addressing in terms of investment. And if we're going to fix in a major way, renovate the middle schools, that means put $500,000 into one or the other. The question is this really in the best interest of the town of Long Meadow, when perhaps we could get state money and build a new building, one that would more adequately serve the needs of the children, and that should be the number one priority.
Well, just to kind of piggyback on John, if I can, I think that we've seen over the last couple of years, and Richard, you probably remember this when you were on capital planning, it's incredibly difficult for us to get any sort of even small project done at either of the middle schools these days, because there is that question that remains, or well, what are you going to do? And we can't answer that tonight, and I don't think that you can answer it, and I don't think any board sitting here tonight would be able to say, what are you going to do, or when is this going to happen? Because the timeline, once this is submitted, is completely out of our hands, in a very large respect. But, I think that this is how we have to kind of indicate to, at least, through the process, that we have You know, we have needs the same way that, you know, you have needs on the general government side, and, you know, we're kind of running out of an ability to proactively tackle them. We have roofs that Marie highlighted that are nearing the end of their life. Now the question is going to come, you know, do we replace those roofs, or, you know, what are you going to do with these schools? And so that's the fundamental question we ask every single year when we go through the capital planning process and when we go through, you know, the budget process, is how are we going to meet those needs of those larger big ticket items that are going to last 20 years. And, you know, that's what we're dealing with internally on a yearly basis.
Yeah, Michael, if I can just comment, and also, you know, when you talk about renovation, John, I don't think renovation is $500,000. Renovation is $5 million for middle schools. $500,000 is deferred maintenance or something like. I think roofs probably more than $500,000 these days. You know, but the problem, Michael, to your comment, is that you know, we saw it this year with the boiler now at Glenbrook. It sounded like from what we were told, the town manager and the vendors came up with I won't say creative, but a good solution that we believe we can now bring both boilers online by putting in a balancing piping rather than replace the boiler. But, you know, if we need a new roof, I mean, if we decided today as a town, we're going forward with this, it's 3 years away.
Right.
And you can't afford to let the kids go to school for 2 winters or 3 winters in the cold. We would put in a boiler, we would put on a roof. I mean, everybody needs to know that, I think it was last year, maybe this year, we finished paying for the roof we tore down on the high school. I mean, we paid for that roof several years after that was gone. As chairman of the capital planning committee, I spent a couple of $1 million replacing windows with a 20-year payback on a high school that lasted 6 years. You know, so you do what you need to do, and I think it sounds dumb, but you really need to look at the two decisions independently. You do what you need to do to maintain the school, to keep it educationally correct, to keep it safe for the kids, to keep it operationally, physically operational. And if along the way you say we're going to buy a new school or build a new school, you go build a new school. But and maybe at that point you tend to scale back when you've got literally the money in the bank. But up until then, I don't think you slow down on saying here's what, because we might and we might want to. You need a roof, you need a boiler, you need whatever you need, you go do it. I mean, you know, and that includes things like pave the parking lot. I got to tell you, some of the parking lots in these schools are in pretty rough shape too.
Williams especially, and you know, and very candidly, I think that we've, you know, year over year kind of put a lot of those items, and we've held off on some items. So, you know, the lockers aren't showing up anymore at Williams, but, you know, there are those items of concern that continue to make it, and every year it's the same conversation about how do we, you know, what are you going to do? And I agree with you that you need to look at them independently, because we do need to meet the needs of current students and make sure that they're warm and that it's not raining on their heads, and, you know, that they're able to go to school in a safe environment. And I think that we've done a really good job with your support of maintaining these schools to a level that, you know, they're not falling apart, you know, the way that the wall was coming off the high school. But, you know, I think that as far as the needs that we have and the needs that we've expressed, you know, they're not meeting our needs from an educational standpoint anymore. And, you know, there are those physical limitations. The ADA issues at Williams, you know, are not things that are going to get solved in Glenbrook, are not things that are going to get solved through a capital planning process. You know, the safety issues we have at Glenbrook with, you know, the lack of walls in the 6th grade hallway, and really the lack of legitimate walls in any hallway, you know, that's not going to get solved much more through a capital process. And so, you know, there's those remaining items out there that are going to continue to pop up and continue to be on our list that are never going to get solved during the, you know, through the current regime of, you know, this is how we triage things.
Right, and you know, and it's got to be 10 years ago when we went through Glenbrook Middle School. We realized that you can't build the walls to the ceiling because you're going to spend
HVAC.
a ton of money on ventilation that isn't built for closed rooms.
Yeah.
You know, I get that, I heard that, and I know that, and that's not going to be solved through anything other than the multi-million, if you decide to do it, a multi-million-dollar infusion that redoes all the ventilating systems.
Right. And to that point, it's, you know,
but again, that decision comes separate from, you know, where we're going with maintaining the schools. And I think if we say, let's hold off on the annual stuff to some degree, I believe that's why it's good that the maintenance of those schools belongs on the town side and not the school committee side, because we're charged, and for better or worse, the town, DPW Buildings Department is charged with making sure the building's maintained, that you can get it up to 70 degrees every day in the winter, no matter how cold it is, and all that kind of stuff. And you're charged with making sure you have the right educational environment. And as long as we keep those separate, let's just march down our separate paths. At some point, we're going to say, gee, isn't it a shame we did this? But, we spent money before that we didn't need to. But at the time you spend it, you got to spend it, and you don't know where else what's going to come down the road.
I'd like to see the select board pass the SOI because the MSBA has done a better job of actually defining whether the building should be renovated or just go through repairs or should be replaced. They only funded 8 out of 106 projects last year. They sent several projects over to the renovation side. They said, you need to come back and you're going to be put into the queue for windows, roofs, and boilers, because you're not at a place where you're even close to being redone or on our list. And if we go through the process, we get the SOI, I think we'd have a clearer understanding from the state. How do our schools compare to others? Are we a project that's a renovation, or are we really something that's going to be a brand new school? Are they going to fund us for things like windows, boilers, and roofs, which you can't put in for while you're applying for an SOI? And I think the only way to answer all these questions that linger in the community is actually to put this SOI forward and get us into the queue to work with the MSBA to see where we stand on what we are going to get from them and whether or not we'll ever be eligible for funding.
And ultimately,
and not to be argumentative, because but I personally am very leery that, based on the experience with high school, that the MSBA is truly an independent observation of whether you should renovate or build new. I think that they're very, very subject to, or my perception was they were very subject to being influenced by people locally, by people at the time going to state legislators telling them, no, you don't want to go forward. That's just my personal opinion. And so my sense is that I think we should have a town-wide, like we're saying, come up with some consensus from the town, get people's inputs and go forward with where we want to be. I don't know what that is. I do know that our middle schools, in my opinion, especially Williams Middle School, was more needed to have something done than even the high school. Having seen both schools very closely, having looked at the amount of money that was spent on both schools over the 10 years prior to replacing the high school. That's my opinion only. The fact is the town went forward and replaced the high school. I know, I can see, I've been through Williams School an awful lot when I was on capital planning. It's got issues, I guess is the best way to say it.
They both do. I think one writer of the SOI would tell you Glenbrook's worse, one will tell you Williams. I think in our visit again today, it's very clear. Both have deficits in different ways. It's a shame you couldn't combine the two of them, that they're not on the same campus. Williams has very small rooms. Glenbrook has larger rooms. Williams has better windows in terms of getting AC, air conditioners in there. Glenbrook has horrible windows you can't put in there. You can't control
Williams
the
is on one
HVAC
floor.
at Glenbrook. You can go back and forth on these, Mark.
Glenbrook
They're
is
both
us
in need.
living with educational models of the 1960s, which was open classroom, and now we're stuck with it 50 years later, and people now realize open classroom
Disaster.
may
for
never
for
been
a
the way to go.
plethora of reasons is not.
And my
you know.
kids lived through that. My kids went there.
Well, and our kids do it every single day, and
Right.
and Glenbrook is performing really, really well, and so it's obviously, their kids are resilient, they're adaptable, they'll do what they have to do, and they'll get to high school and they'll do really well, and so I think for us it's like we've articulated, it's a matter of being able to effectively implement new curriculum. It's being able to plug in a microwave and computers at the same time. It's being able to make sure that wheelchair-bound student doesn't have to go outside to get to the first floor. There's those issues that really just they're not conducive to what we need anymore. And that being said, I think that this topic of engaging the town and what they want, I mean that's an opportunity we're going to have regardless of if the MSBA engages us or not. And and we know from the last time around when we did this that the town has to vote to appropriate money for a feasibility study. The town has a say in every single step of this. We might be sitting up here as the leadership in town kind of steering the project along, but, we've all had our items lose a town meeting before too. So I think, at the end of the day, there is that system of checks and balances, and if this is something that the town really feels like they're not ready for, then, their opportunity to let us know that is to tell us that they don't want this, and that's fine. But we obviously have, as a school committee, an obligation to, put forward what we think is the important things for our students.
So, just to follow up on my question about the input that you've received sort of informally, you said that, Michael, that people were saying that they wanted a combined school. Some of the rationale that we've heard here from Marie is kind of inside baseball.
Right.
I'm guessing that, community members aren't articulating the way Marie has. So
No, they're not.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out, because I haven't really heard anybody, not that they would necessarily come to me for this because
Right.
it's not a school issue, but what is it that they're saying, look, we need a bigger school?
They're not even saying we need a bigger school. What they're saying, and I'll let you go too, because I'm talking a lot, but they're saying, essentially, they're saying, why do we have 2 middle schools? It seems stupid. That's the comment I get. And
Yeah, and it's also the kind, middle school is very different than elementary school or high school in that, the community doesn't go to the middle school until they have a child in middle school, so they don't really kind of see the condition of what the school is like and what goes on there. So it's a very small window of time that their child is there, and it's usually a rather turbulent time. So their attention is elsewhere. So it's one of those things that doesn't come up until your kid's in 6th grade, and then you immediately forget about it when they're out. But the idea of having 2 schools.
we all did that in middle school.
Yeah, I still am in middle school. So.
That's true.
The idea of having the 2 schools together, so when the kids are leaving elementary school, there's not the separation. They are going into, a larger body of kids from the 3 elementary schools, so it provides more opportunities socially, academically, for enrichment, all sorts of things, and that's sort of the general push towards, at least for parents, that's their main focus, is more opportunity for their kids and a larger sort of social body to pull from.
Because one of the, things that I'm aware of, again, I'm not an educator, all I can do is sort of spot the issue, trying to get more up to speed on it, but I know, the Gates Foundation, for example, they got billions and billions of dollars, that they think small schools is one of the keys to educational excellence.
Sure, but Alex, we'd be like a micro school from like a school in Seattle, even combining, we would still be a really small school.
No, and I get the point that we're not talking about 2,000, but for example, I know in Springfield recently, they had a 900 student school, and they decided to break it up into three 300s, three 300 student schools, because they thought that was better. And and I understand there's sort of trade-offs either way, and I got a better sense of that from you, Marie, when we talked about scheduling and stuff like that. But have you guys looked at the literature, because I know there's a lot of research on it. I haven't read it all, but I know there's a lot of research out there about school size and how that impacts. And to the extent that you guys have looked at that literature, could you share it with us? 'Cause
Sure,
I'd
I've
like to
done
read it.
extensive studies on it. I'll send you some documents and
Okay.
send them your way. But I was a principal in Newton, Massachusetts, and we created a 4th middle school, and we did extensive studies around what the right sizes were, because the question was whether to build a large middle school and combine them or to keep smaller. But again, in Newton, one middle school was 900. At the time, mine was 850, and we went down to schools around 600 to 700, and one school had 800. And we believed that those were the best. Driving factors were around schedule, the ability to offer more electives to students, the fact that you had them small enough so the principals and teachers knew kids by name in the building. You looked at how you could best balance your guidance staff to make sure you had appropriate personnel in the building. But Newton, after an extensive study, came down to the realization that around 600 to 700 was a great size for a middle school. But I'll send you some articles.
Yeah, because I think the people that, get in the weeds, you know, like, I think there are institutes that are devoted to small schools, you know? Like, I think they define the small school of 1 to 500. So,
Right.
I mean, we're above, we would be above that, we'd be 694, you know,
Down to about
Um,
600.
you know, and maybe down to 600 eventually, but we're not you know, we're not, as you say, up to the 2,000. And the thing that I've read about is, it's not so much all the sort of mechanical things that you're talking about, which are obviously important, but sort of the kind of the softer things of, you know, the social and well-being of the children. You know, it's a very sensitive time for them. Having a smaller community, you know, helps. You know, it's sort of that thing that, you know, that seems to be
Well, part of the-
pushing, you know, the school size rather
Right.
than, look, we can have X number of, you know, we can, you know, schedule lunch at this time and, you know, that kind of thing.
My middle school in Newton, we won the Vanguard Model School. We were a middle school of 680. We won excellent schools. We won every award going because we had those relationships. We had quality. The school is large enough to provide an excellent education, a well diversified curriculum for the kids, but we knew them intimately. I think when you go too small, you do things. You have people teaching outside of their expertise, which is not great for middle school kids, especially those that need challenge. It also means that you have the teachers that are taxed doing more preps than a secondary teacher is trained to do. It also means that you cut down the number of electives. I've been in schools that are smaller. It does not give you the flexibility of scheduling. It does not give you flexibility with staff. So you may have more, they claim more intimate relationships, but in a school of 680, I could name every one of my students as a principal. My assistant principals knew them all by name. We knew the families. So in terms of that intimacy, it is there in a school of that size. But it does give you a much broader academic base for our students.
Alice, anything else?
No, that's,
Okay, good, that's pretty good. Obviously, everybody in this room is very much aware the town has many needs. There's three major pieces on the puzzle right now that I can see that looks like on the relatively near future. We have a senior center that's being brewed around. We have a Department of Public Works that likely should have been replaced in 1987 that we're just starting to move forward. And of course, we have the consolidation of schools. I've loved the policy or the program ever since you started talking about the consolidation. The only thing I like better than consolidation is likely is regionalization, but
You don't want
that's
that.
just me. That's just me.
Let's go on record as saying no.
Yeah. Well, for my record, I say yes.
Virginia.
No, I hear, I hear all the.
Then you really get away from small schools.
Yeah, I hear all the
That's right.
talk about the class sizes and all that, and I emailed my wife here. I believe she had, it was either 12 or 1,700 people in her senior class, so it's kind of hard for me to talk about 300 people's schools and all that. And that was, we don't want to say how many years ago, but it was a couple of years ago. So there are a lot of needs. And the question is going to be coming up, how do we fund them? And I think it's still a very relevant question. Have you guys given consideration
Well,
to how we would fund?
Funding with schools, you're talking about a major assist from the state. And I stand corrected on the amount of money. I don't know what it would cost, 20 million, 30 million. But a big chunk of that would come from the mass building.
What do you figure this middle school is going to cost?
We haven't even begun to think about what about what that could be, because it depends on the scenario, the outcome. I mean, if it's a consolidated school, then it's obviously gonna, be a new building and have its own costs. If it's a renovation to each individual school or additions, that's a different scenario.
My point, though, was that with schools, you're getting state aid, a large
Yeah,
chunk, not
yeah.
of money.
No, I realize
But,
that.
with a DPW or a senior center, and various folks have their opinions on the need for those, well, it would be funded completely by ourselves.
Yeah, they're 100% funded. There's no
So-
lance or pride for those, as we
So-
said before.
Well, I think that's an
Not there.
important thing to keep in mind.
Well, it is a very important thing to keep in mind, but the question was, we know a school's going to be 20 to 40.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I think you're looking at the high school got funding of just under 50% reimbursement. So that's pretty good. I think that's something that we are trying to bring forward to the town. But we really do need to know, are we looking at major capital projects to improve these schools with your boilers, your roofs, your windows, et cetera? Or are we looking to work with the town toward building at least one middle school, or are you looking at building both? But the only way to do that is to move forward in SOI where we enter a partnership of study. The first step, if the SOI is granted by the MSBA, is a study. The last time we had that done, JCC, was in 2008, so we haven't had a facility study. We understand that there are other needs in town, but how are we going to move forward if we're not studying it, we're not making a commitment to either fix them as they are or to build a new school? So I think in SOI would get us to that next level where we'd begin to do some of that research. We'd bring in professional organizations. We'd have the public forums. We'd have an educational philosophy, and all of that would be brought forward. And as Michael said, at that time it would be up to the taxpayers to vote whether or not they are in support of the plan that comes out of all that study.
And at this point, it's up to us to vote. And that's why we're having this meeting, is for us to be able to ask questions. And because I'm under the understanding that, according to state things, the town should be prepared to move forward within 2 years.
But you can also turn it down.
Okay, I understand. Well, I can't see that happening, Marie, and I don't think you can either. I don't think anybody would be reasonable enough to believe that if we were approved, we'd turn it down. But I think the discussions are healthy to have before we jump in the water, see what the temperature of the water is. And as I say, we know it's a major undertaking, and the town is going to have, at a bare minimum, 2 to 3 major undertakings.
I just want to say, we're just closing down the high school project. I've given that my full attention. I still meet daily about what's going on in the high school. I think we're ready now to shift gears. We're about to close that project out. We're closing down on the major problems that we've had to address to make sure that we're getting what we can from our vendors, and to make sure that school's in great shape. This will get our full attention. There will be a lot of publicity and forums, but again, if you pass the SOI, we have a period of time to study, to do public forums, to solicit public input, and then the town can decide whether or not they want to move forward based on all that work.
I understand everything you said, and I looked at our long-range debt schedule. It looks like we don't really get any relief until about 2000 or FY23, and we lift off about $700,000 or $800,000. That's
the first bond.
Yeah, that's the first. That's the old stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's the old stuff. So that's what we're looking on our long-range debt on our community. That's the first window that we have to where we get any real freedom. So as I say, and I think the one thing, and it really bothers me, like, personally, but it's not a major thing, is that we sit here talking about a wonderful plan for consolidating and building one school. And all of our thoughts are under the pretense that this is what's going to happen, but yet you're saying that they may not even approve it.
Oh, exactly. This is a proposal. The MSBA has an awful lot to say, but it's really based on good research studies, bringing in professional companies. They do enrollments. We have to do it with them. They do their own enrollment study. We conduct our own. They combine them. They decide what the numbers are to make sure you're building a correct size school. They decide whether it's a renovation or a new building, and that's based on bringing in professional companies to do thorough studies of the building, which we're long overdue in having done. We're basing all our information on a 2008 report. So the next phase in getting an SOI accepted will give us all the information that we need to answer your questions and have financial support from those studies from the state, rather than the town incurring those costs.
And hard as it may be to believe, this is actually a state agency that's looking to create efficiency where it can. So, that's, something that they often try to do when they look at, if they are going to propose or go forward and suggest that we do consolidate, they would do it not only because of the space, but they do it because of the administrative savings. They do it because of the energy savings. They would do it for all of those reasons. And the same is true of whatever they recommend. Is they're going to look to have us implement the most efficient and effective plan going forward, whether it is a new energy management system, or whether it is a renovation, or whether it is a consolidated building.
There's another point too that Mark's hit on. I think Alex hit on it, and I know I hit on it when I was on capital planning. We talk about the improvements at the school. I don't think there's anyone that's ever said that they won't maintain everything at whatever standard we desire. But when there is a an open need for an SOI out, and as I say, 3 or 4 years ago, it does make you be cautious on if you're talking about major improvements. So it kind of stops the game dead in its tracks, waiting for a full commitment from everybody to move in that proper direction. So I know you say, keep them, we got to repair them. Well, that's obvious, and that's
But,
fairly obvious.
Richard,
Yeah.
if you people do not approve of this, then the process can't go forward. And, you're actually being a bottleneck on this. You're not letting the people of Long Meadow have a say about the future of their town.
Well, they're going to
And you
have
keep
their
kicking-
say.
You guys keep kicking around the DPW and the senior center. And I've been here since 1976, and I've been hearing about senior center, and I've been hearing about the DPW, and nothing's been done. Okay? So that's why I'm a little bit skeptical of your concern here. It seems to me, we're asking for the SOI to go forward. Let the state deal with it, send it back to us with a yes or no, and then we present it to the town. If they say no, then we're gonna have to cool our heels and wait, okay? But if they say yes,
John,
then
you
we're gonna have to make a
sound like it's
presentation to
only
the
your
town.
problem. That's an odd one. You sound like it's just your problem. It's the problem with the whole community, the schools are.
But we're charged directly with
Yeah,
the
but it's the
responsibility
whole
for the schools.
community's
And you're
responsibility.
giving us the responsibility of the DPW, and...
No, you don't have the responsibility
We're not
for
responsible
DPW.
for the DPW.
But
You
this,
guys are.
this board does have responsibility for all of those. And we have
Yeah,
many
okay.
needs that are placed
So
before
that's
us.
what we're asking you to stand up and take full responsibility.
We're going to take responsibility for every
this
decision
SOI.
we have to
Let
make.
the SOI go forward.
Well, that's,
That seems to me to be the definition of responsible behavior in this particular case, at this particular time.
okay, I'll so note your concern. But there are other concerns.
Well, I think Richard, I think we're acutely aware of those concerns, and I think that we, have kind of had them be part of that dialogue that we've had as a board, and, when we approved at least our side of the SOI 2 weeks ago, I think we made mention of those concerns, and quite honestly, I think capital planning is exhibiting the appropriate amount of, sort of restraint, and when they do evaluate what's going on because of the fact that we've had SOIs out and because there is this open question about middle schools. So we don't begrudge them for it, but it does become an issue. And I would also say that, DPW has done a great job of maintaining the buildings that we have. And, I think Chris Reed has been a great partner for us this year and really kind of putting those needs forward. So nobody's saying, and nobody's said that these buildings aren't, being maintained to the best ability possible. But it does become, an issue when we do have a roof approaching end of life and we can't answer the question specifically about what the next step is with these buildings. This is our opportunity to kind of define what that next step is. And if the town turns around and says, hey, we're not interested, then we know that we have to go and try to figure out how to get a roof on that building. But if the town does choose to engage in this process, then of course we're not asking for a new roof and we're not asking for new windows. And so it's very difficult for us to be able to kind of delineate what the process is we're going to follow and what the needs of the school that we're going to fill are without knowing what our next steps are. And this is unfortunately the process that we have to engage in to figure out what those next steps are.
Alex, you have something?
One of the things that's come across to me during this meeting that I hadn't quite realized to this point, I think maybe Marie's mentioned it, Michael, you've mentioned it, is, the MSBA decides. They're going to decide whether it's a renovation or whether it's a new school or whether it's combining or and I'm struck by, and I guess this is maybe just the nature of the beast, how much is sort of ceded to people that are not in this community, and which sort of gets to me, it's sort of the question of process. During the high school debate, it seemed to me there were sort of 2 points at which people had a vote. One was whether to fund the study. It's kind of hard to turn that down. You got to find out what's going on. And then, then it was sort of the final question. Okay, are you going to take the high school as presented? Sort of an on-off switch, and, there are some people that say, well, I'm in favor of doing something for the high school, but not this. Right. And there really wasn't much of an outlet for that. And it strikes me that here, you could have people who want to do something but don't want to combine schools. Sure. For maybe the reasons that I was raising. You could have people say, I want to do something, but I don't want to go to that site. or to the other site, you know, or you could have just people oppose it for financial reasons, you know, because they think it's cheaper to do it, you know, to fix it. And I guess what the question I'm posing to all of you guys on the school committee, to the extent you've thought about it, sort of, what's the process for us, you know, for us deciding sort of those critical questions? Because, you know, to me with the high school, you know, I was supportive of it because to me, that final question was whether you want to turn down $40 million from the state. You know, you'd have to have a pretty bad project to turn that down, right? I mean, it would have to be so flawed and so, you know, bad for the town. You know, that's what it would take to turn it down, you know. Right. And, you know, but that other question of maybe I'm supportive of something, but not this. And I would like to see us this time around to have a better point for people to have input on that. And I was just wondering if any of you guys had thought about that.
But I think, Alex, that I totally understand what you're saying, but I think this is one of those cases where the state has the money to give, and the state gets to control the strings that are attached to that money.
Right.
The process, the outline, the timeline, the time frame, the choices are dictated by the state and by the agency to a very large extent. Yes, you know, like everybody's been saying is, you know, the state does a feasibility study. We also have to do one so that, you know, kind of a checks and balances system.
Right.
But if it's a community input that the community says, well, you know, I'd like to go this route, but this is what the state's recommending, we most certainly could go the route that the residents would like, but we're not going to get any money for it.
We can do whatever we want, we're just not going to get the money.
So that's kind of, you know, I understand where you're coming from, but we're bound by the constraints that the state puts on us.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to kind of put out there, or to kind of recognize as well, you know, the building you're sitting in right now, you know, the design of this building ultimately was, yes, approved by the state, but they had very little input in how we actually, you know, where this room sits right now and, you know, where the driveway is. You know, that, all of this was a result of those community conversations that took place over 4 days called visioning sessions back in 2010. You know, and whether you remember or not, I mean, you know, the school building committee did hold a series, a lot, like not only, like at least 20 forums, I would say at least 20 forums, to engage the community on those concerns and to engage them on feedback on, you know, what the right thing for us is. You know, the recommendation that the feasibility study on this building came back and said was, you got, you know, we're recommending that you build a new facility. But they had nothing to say about site selection. You know, they had nothing to say about the manner in which the building was designed. They had nothing to say about, you know, the color of the walls until it came time to write a check. But at that point, it's pretty much already done. So, you know, we as a community have immense say in how we want, you know, our building to look and how we want it to function, regardless of what the recommendation is. You know, the issue, and like Janet did a good job of highlighting, is just that we don't have a lot of leeway in, you know, what they are willing to fund. Now, if the town wants to, you know, decides collectively that this is a great idea, we should just build a brand new middle school or renovate both of our middle schools and not engage the state at all, then we have complete flexibility in doing whatever we want to do and however we want to do it. So it's just, that's the cost of the process, unfortunately.
Alex, if I can just respond very quickly, because pretty broadly known, I was on the other side of the discussion back 5 years ago, but your question is, why would anybody want to turn down $40 million? Who would turn down $40 million? There are several people who thought, you know, instead of that $40 million costing, which was a little bit more than $40 million, costing us what's over now $44 million, you know, perhaps there was a plan that would only cost the town residents $25 or $30 million as an overall renovation.
But that option was never presented. Like, that's the thing.
You're right. I didn't feel it was.
Right. Yeah.
But beside it, that's ancient history. The other thing is that, you know, just to reiterate this comment on what the MSBA does. I mean, we had a choice for this high school of a model school versus a unique school. Mm-hmm. You know, the town chose, the people who were in the position to do so chose a unique school. that, I mean, you just look at the difference between Long Meadow and Wilbraham and the cost, or Minnetonka, excuse me, the Minnetonka Regional High School. You know, it's a higher reimbursement rate.
Right.
It's, you know, there's all kinds of implications that you get if you
Also, it
Take
doesn't
the
hurt to be a
MSBA's
regional school district. They got a lot more money for that too.
You know, I mean, there, Michael, there was an increment for every little
Yeah.
thing is 2% for this and 3% for that.
Energy efficiencies, and
all that kind of stuff,
1 point.
and we
yeah.
lived through it. So, I mean, I do, though, believe that because of, Richard mentioning competing priorities and other things, there might be some benefit for looking at broader input prior to going forward with the state to say, let's submit an MSBA and see what the state thinks. It is a level of professional or sophistication or whatever you want to, of outsiders coming in who look at more than just Longmeadow, and clearly there's some benefit to doing that. But on the other hand, there may be also some benefits, so we say, I guess my concern is, so we don't find ourselves in a position that I felt the town was in 5 years ago when we said, so we got the money, how can you not, you gotta take it.
Right.
And all of a sudden, the discussion stopped there. If you don't take the money, you're an idiot. Let's take, and we had gone, in my opinion, we put the cart before the horse. We'd gone out and said, here's this option, here, of course it's what you want to do. And so the discussion really got short-circuited, and I'd love to see a discussion
Right.
that starts early that says, is this in fact we want to do? Because when we know if this is what we want to do, then we go out and say, look, MSBA, we're all behind this 100%. Here's our singular plan. It's not a, what do you think? We know where we want to do it, we know what we want to do, we know how we want to do it. We've spent a little bit of the town's money because we were able to do that, to put this together. So now we've got a truly unified plan. And instead of saying, so what do you think, MSBA? It's, now maybe they come back and say, saying, well, if it's what's your alternative? But at least we go in with where we want to be. I mean,
I
that's just-
respectfully disagree,
Okay,
Mark.
fine.
When the MSBA comes in, the first thing they do is they send in engineers, and we have engineers in a company that look at every room, every pipe, every single piece of the facility, and they tell you what it would cost to repair and replace, and they also tell you what it would cost to renovate. So we can have discussions, and we can go down the road of making a decision before we have all the data in front of us. If we choose to set up these committees and do the work before filing an SOI, we have to pay for all of that ourselves. These are intense studies that they do, that they help share the cost with us. It gives us all the data we need to make an informed decision. So if you want to set up these committees and do it, we're going to have committees when they say, how much is it going to cost to repair Glenbrook? I don't know. How much is it going to cost to repair Williams? I don't know. They will do everything from the roofs, the windows, down to the problems we're having with our boilers, and we need that information to make informed decisions. If we don't put in the SOI, then we're not going to have that data unless you choose to fund a study of our own, where we're bringing in companies like we did with the JCC report, in 2008.
Quite honestly, I mean, and just kind of what I'm, some of what I'm interpreting is, that I think that you tend to feel that we're not open to including the community in this conversation. And, I think ultimately this is the most, important conversation we can have as a community. And so, obviously there's a process that if this is the route we're going to go down, we have to follow. But, we're not going to do it in a vacuum. And I think that, we would be foolish to do it in a vacuum. Ultimately, we decide to fund any building, or we decide to fund any project as a community. So to not involve stakeholders on any level would be a huge mistake on our part. And I agree with you, Mark, that we should be, kind of knowing exactly what we want to do as a community. But it's hard to tell right now, and I think we've kind of tried to answer we're not able to answer that in a big way, what it's going to cost, what it should look like, what are the real issues, what has deteriorated since 2008, what's the site. And, if at the end of the day, after we conduct a feasibility study and we decide that this isn't the direction we want to go in, well, at least we have an updated idea of what's wrong with the buildings, and we have a plan to move forward to fix what's going on as a community. I mean, there's an inherent benefit to moving forward in this manner. But, regardless of what the outcome is, it's a decision that's going to happen, amongst the voters at town meeting, amongst the people who've elected you and elected us. And that's, I think that goes without saying.
And I'll go back to those reports that we have from 2008. They're not well done. They're very superficial. They do not give us the information we need to give you a well-thought-out decision. And if anybody's thinking whether it should just be a renovation or a whole new building, you need a far more in-depth study than what we have. And the MSBA will help you do that, and they'll help pick up the cost.
Ray, do you mind sending those superficial reports to?
They're in
The
my
JCJ?
office.
JCJ report, we've got.
There are like 10 binders.
Yeah,
Right,
they're-
they've
they-
got copies.
yeah,
Which-
The JCJ.
For the record, those,
When
they
we were at your
contradict
meeting in
themselves
town hall, they're
internally.
all
Yeah,
in the
they're-
back room in town hall.
Alright,
Yeah.
okay.
JCJ report. Yeah,
I recommend one way or another you have new facilities done, new facility studies done, and whether you get the MSBA to help fund that through an SOI or choose to do it independently. When we have these public discussions, there will be debates on whether or not to renovate or replace, and we can't answer those questions without a better study that gives us the information we need.
And at least we can get reimbursed
And that's
on
the reason
the
we're
big
coming
one.
forward with an SOI, so we get that information, so that we can make informed decisions for you.
Would they send out those engineers just by sending an SOI, or do we have to sort of get to another stage in the
You
process?
have to be selected for the SOI, and then they work with you, and they do an in-depth study that is so helpful for the community. So
Sure.
even if you choose not to go forward, you still have all that information to work with. My last project in Carlisle, they came, they did that, and they decided that one part was going to be a renovation and one was going to be a new building for a primary school. But the studies slanted what the community was thinking in terms of building a whole new school and broke it down just to a primary. But the reports were the most helpful I've ever seen in terms of managing a building project.
So out of the 108 or whatever it was last year, I think you said 8 got
8 out of 106, I believe.
got selected to get to this engineering stage?
Yeah.
Yes.
That was it.
They
So-
began their engagement with the MSBA, and I'll just kind of, just to give you sort of a regional
So if
perspective on
Let me
this.
just, before I get.
Yeah.
So in other words, everybody else just.
They get a
got
one-page
nothing.
letter that
Okay,
says,
all right,
unfortunately, you
okay.
were not selected this year. Please apply again next
Okay.
next
Which is
January.
why we'd like to get back in the queue
Sure.
to begin to build
Yeah,
our
Can I just
case.
say something? To the state's job is, they're in charge of a pool of money, which comes, I believe, out of the
1% of the sales tax.
sales tax, okay? So they've got a pile of money, not a huge pile, but they got an amount of money. And it's their job to find out which community has the most pressing need for repairs or reconstruction or new construction. That's their job. Okay? They don't come in and say, well, we don't like your school, or we don't like your plan. They're not pushing the people who live in the town out of the way. This is not a state group coming in and telling us what to do. We are the people, and the school committee, sending the message up to the Mass Building Authority, asking them to consider our concerns. Their job then is to look at it in comparison with all the other communities that are asking them to do the same thing, and then making a judgment. Then it comes back to the people of the town of Long Meadow, okay? And if I could just add something, Mark, you said we chose not to go with the standard model the last time. The reason we didn't go with the standard model the last time was so we could save the building that was constructed in 1971-72, which contained a swimming pool and the library, et cetera.
And where
we
you're sitting
added that
now.
on to the building. So we got a better building out of it as a result of that decision.
I didn't say it was wrong, I just said it was the decision we made.
Okay, but
There's also, we were, at one
Well,
point,
the
they were gonna put us
implication
across
was
the street.
that, see, we would have been wiser and more economic to have said, hey, just give us the basic model. And there's people out there who rant and rave about how we, the people on the school committee and the high school building committee, were wasting taxpayers' money when they could have been saving it. And the implication was that the standardized model was a more cost-efficient one than the one we went with. The one we went with was a better model. That's my position.
And I think sometimes, all of us are so entrenched in the community and, we all take to heart our jobs and we really take pride in what we do and we all are looking out for the best interest of all. But none of us are experts in building design, site selection, evaluation of the sites. I mean, Alex alluded to that he and Marie and I went today and were walking through the buildings. And sure, there are things you can see, But there, I'm sure, are also equally as many, if not more, things that we can't see. Or if we did see, none of us would know what to do with. And I think the point of going forward with an SOI, and if we are one of those lucky 8 out of the 106, it's giving an opportunity for people with a fresh set of eyes who are experts in what they do to make recommendations, rather than those of us who live here and are vested going, well, this is better than this, and this is better than this, and this looks worse than this, when we don't really have that kind of professional knowledge. And by going forward and if selected as one of the few, it also allows those studies to be reimbursed, as opposed to, we could go out today and have, a site selection and a feasibility study done, and we're going to have to foot the entire bill. And if that feasibility study comes back and says, yeah, you guys really need to move forward with the SOI, and
We're still going to have to do another study.
we're still going to have to do another study, and I don't want to say that we've wasted money, but it's
Wasting money.
another step in terms of taxpayer approval. It's another step in terms of delaying the process. And in that time, it might be incurring more expenses for the regular maintenance and upkeep of the building. So I think, we're all very passionate about what we do, but none of us are experts on moving forward. The school committee, I think, has done due diligence in going as far as they can to recognize, hey, we know the building conditions are not ideal. Are they
Suboptimal.
optimal? Are they dangerous? No. But we also recognize that we know that things are coming up that are very costly repairs or replacements. So let's move ahead and see if we're even eligible to take another step further.
And I want to reiterate, the SOI gives us 2 different lenses. It gives us our own feasibility study, which they mandate we do and help pay for, and they send their own team of engineers. So you get 2 studies going on simultaneously that give you that valuable information. The MSBA sends their own team of engineers that come in.
And who's the other one?
Then the feasibility study, they have us hire a
Okay,
company that
right.
does it, so they're double checking the work of that. If the town goes ahead and does a feasibility study by ourselves, we pay for it, and we have nobody double checking their work. And the state demands meticulous detail when they follow up on these projects.
And just to kind of give you a regional perspective of what's taking place with School Building Authority and funding of projects, Ludlow has submitted 2 SOIs last year for 2 of their elementary schools. Both were denied. And their Veterans Park School and their East Street School are in terrible condition. East Long Meadow submitted for their high school, denied. There is a pattern. If you look back at when the high school was approved, East Hampton was approved, West Springfield was approved, Minnechaug was approved, Long Meadow was approved.
Ludlow was also told to reapply. Chances are very good next year because they're trying to consolidate 2 schools into one.
So, there is, and especially having the winter we've had, and especially since we've gone through this process with the MSBA 5 years ago or 6 years ago, they've changed the way they do business a little bit more, which is some of those programs Marie was talking about, funding things like roofs, funding things like boilers, trying to, have more longevity to buildings. So that there isn't that burden on communities, and then so there isn't that burden on the taxpayer on the state level either. And I think, listen, everybody knows we're entering the next fiscal year with a large deficit on the state level. It is, but that money's still protected, and so the MSBA might be a little bit more cautious about what they're approving, what they're not approving. We can't speak for them, but we can speak for ourselves, and I think we've articulated the reasons why we believe we should go forward tonight, and and hopefully you will support that as well, and I encourage you to do it.
Anything else, Alex?
Nope.
Yeah, there was one thing on the write-up on Williams. Tom, I think it said here there's 400 amp service. There was an additional 200 put on that in FY13.
From 200, right?
No, it couldn't have been 200.
I'd have to check with Chris. He,
That was the data that
information he
Chris
gave
Reed
us.
did provide
Yeah.
us.
Well, I mean, I know there was an extra 200 put on in 13.
was that
That
for
and
the
it's
center,
central.
for the stage lights that were added?
It was just for additional loading, but
Yeah.
it's not, Mike, I wouldn't believe it had 200.
No,
That-
there was 2 amp things that there were 2 electrical projects we did that year. One was at
Center.
Center and
Right,
one was at
center
Williams.
and over here, they put a 200 amp 3-phase panel at each school. So the only reason I mentioned, I would imagine that figure's likely wrong, at 400.
We can check on that.
Well, and Richard, with due respect, Tom and I had worked going back through the JCJ
Yeah.
report that we kept referencing, and in contact with Chris and with Todd to try to find dates and descriptions and information, and what you have in front of you in the reports is what was provided to us.
Yeah, I would just mention in case.
We'll check.
No,
Yeah, we'll take a look
absolutely.
at it. And
We'll
we'll see if,
definitely check.
we'll correct it if it's wrong.
You know what always bothers me when we're doing this is that, when I say that, it's a great idea to consolidate the schools. There's no doubt about it. It needs to be done. But I sit here, when we're talking, even talking on camera with the community, and the question keeps flying up to me is, what are we going to do with Glenbrook? What are we doing with the property? And maybe I like to get the cart and the horse all mixed together, but it would certainly be nice if we had some thought. I mean, what's 22 acres up there? What would we do with that spot? You talk about different scenarios you're laying out. We don't know what that site would be worth if it's developed. We have no idea what the revenue is. We have no idea how much income would come in. Consequently, that would greatly influence the brand-new school that we're going to build. If we're in fact leaving that property, I mean, there could be the whole equation could change.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's all part of it. They do traffic studies, and we would have to do
Right.
traffic studies, enrollment studies. If the land was developed, that would be factor into what the enrollment could be, leading again to the overcrowding issue. But
Right.
that's all why to
Right.
get funding for the study is critical. In whether or not the town people accept it in the end, that's where we do all our work, our publicity, but we'll have data to share. Right now, we don't have enough information to move this project forward without getting the MSBA's approval.
I mean, our preferred, model of what we'd like, if all things like being great and everything goes well, we would prefer a consolidated middle school. I think that's been the overarching sort of consensus from the board, which would free up a site, either the Williams site or the Glenbrook site, both of which would be probably pretty valuable for development purposes. So, that's obviously something to keep in mind. And, Mark, I know you mentioned the water tower property, and, obviously this board's taken no action on it, but, who's to say what future boards will do? And so, I think, there is something in this as far as, bringing tax revenue and bringing, more people into this community, associated with what we'd like. But again, we're sitting here in 2015 before there's an SOI, before the state, and we don't know what they're going to recommend. In our perfect world, we would have one middle school.
Yeah, and as I say, I like the concept of strategic planning and thinking. And this
Right.
goes in line with what you guys are saying on the repair in the schools. If there'd been a decision made 7 years ago where they were going to lean, I mean, you could have seen there'd be a whole different
Sure.
picture that takes place. It's just our inability to set clear-cut strategic direction
Yeah, there's
is what impedes the best plans, and it always
many
has,
unknowns.
and it always
Yeah.
will. Anything
Richard,
else?
I was going to just comment on what you were saying, because it's sort of what I was talking about, public's input. Some people would want to kind of see if that's part of the equation. Maybe they're supportive of repairing the school, but they're dead set against developing that property. Or maybe they want to preserve those fields, I mean, and to me, I think people in the community, deserve to sort of understand what it all entails, which I think sort of, favors what you're talking about, Richard, is to think about it holistically. It's not just doing one thing, it's a lot of things, which is sort of brings me back to my original point, which is, to me, this is a very complicated
It is.
project.
It's a complicated one with what's being proposed. No, John.
And I think too, sure, we might have a preference as a site, and when a company comes in to do feasibility study, they might bring something forth that neither one of our groups had thought of. But like it's been said, is technically the land that the school buildings are on are owned by the town. So even if we were to say, okay, well, we'd like to build a new consolidated middle school and we'd like to put it on Williams' lot, we really, as a school committee, have no say as to what happens to the property at Glenbrook once it's vacated.
Good news is it's your problem to
Good news,
develop.
Well, that's, I know that, Michael.
And
Yeah,
that would
but
be
that's-
something, you know, and I get what you're saying, Alex, of, well, would people be in favor of the project or against if they knew that Glenbrook property was
You're
gonna
gonna
be.
put a 5-story high-rise there, right?
Well, if you were gonna build, you know, senior housing there, or if you were going to build more shops at the Williams site or whatever. But that's not something that our committee can address. Unfortunately, that's something for your committee to address.
But you can also think about it.
Oh, we thought about
We would love to give you
Focus too much.
input,
Nice,
but,
nice looking sports fields.
Yeah, have thoughts and.
you know, we have all kinds of thoughts, but ultimately, those
Kumbaya moment.
thoughts are not up to us.
But it's a
They're-
great opportunity for our boards to work collaboratively on a larger vision for the community,
And we could work on that. So,
in addition to you submitting the SOIs for us.
yeah. Anything else?
No.
Mark?
I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Really great that you came in. And I think for the people that are watching this at home, the purpose of this, tonight's meeting was to have the schools come in, the superintendent and all the members, and brief the select board and have it on air so we could start to get a dialogue going. We are going to meet, our next scheduled meeting is going to be April 6th. And at that night, we're going to have this item back on the agenda, likely for some more discussion and a vote at that night. I think you have to have it by the 10th, Marie?
Yes, we do.
Yeah,
It
so
has to
the-
be into the atmosphere.
So what I'm asking, reaching out to the community, if you have concerns with what you've heard tonight, this has now been, I guess, televised twice with Select Board, and then you guys had you guys had it at one of your meetings too, correct?
The last
Where
one.
it was
Yes.
televised? So there's, a lot of people should be aware of what's going on now. I would encourage you to share via email, telephone, or however, coffee shop, or however you want. But we have a fairly short amount of time before we're going to make a final vote on this issue. And I, for one, would love to hear from anybody that's willing to share their comments, both up and down. So, any other members? And I'm sure they equally share. We have two members here that aren't here tonight. They had prior arrangements. They couldn't get here, so, and that's why we were going to put off the vote anyway until the 6th, give us some time to process and talk to people. So I do thank you guys for coming in tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. And I'll accept the motion to, yeah,
Second?
yep. And all in favor? Aye. Good night, ladies and
Night.
gentlemen. We'll see you on the 6th of April for our next scheduled meeting.
You gonna do anything other than other housing?
I can't imagine.
Now, Williams may be something